I'm Nathan Forde. I'm 77 years old, and my job is to relate my history to you, especially to my grandkids and posterity going forward for however many generations there will be, and to the rest of the family. So I'll try and do a good job of telling you what happened to me. My journey started August 12, 1943 at 7:30 in the evening on a Thursday. Now my mother tells me that she had been working all day, painting and doing other things in the business that she and my father had, which was renting apartments. And finally she felt like she needed to go to the hospital and went. And when she got there, the delivery started, and I was coming out just fine, and all of a sudden they said problem. Umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. I guess she says because she was going up and down a ladder all day. So they had to put me back in and straighten that problem out, and then I came. And she says even with all of that, I was the easiest birth that she'd ever had. I was born at St. Luke's Presbyterian Hospital in Chicago, prestigious, large hospital. But anyway, after I was born, there were some problems. They said I couldn't go home. There was some problem, and so I stayed in the hospital. My mother went home, and she would go down and visit, and they said, no, he's not ready to come home yet. Pretty soon she got suspicious because of the way they used to do black folks in those days, and somebody came by and told her, you better go get your baby. So she went down one day and said, I want my baby, and they balked. She said she waited there all day. She said, I'm not going home till I get my baby. So anyway, later that day, I think she said she'd been there like 7 or 8 hours. I mean, this was no short ordeal. And she had had words with a lot of different people talking about, give me my baby today. And finally she said they brought me out and threw me at her in a bundle. And that's the way I came home. Well, she suspected that there was some fishy business that went on. They were never able to prove it, but that's the way I came into the world. Looking back at it now and knowing some things that we have found out, we have some suspicions about what that was all about, but I'm not going to reveal that here. We lived at 4953 Vincennes at the time, and so I went home to that house I had 2 brothers, Irwin and Winton. And the unique thing about our family is there's a lot of distance, a lot of years between each one of us. Between Irwin and Winton, that's number 1, and number 2, there are 5 years. Between the rest of us, there's 7 years. So there's 7 years between Winton and me. There's 7 years between myself and Hank. And there's 7 years between a brother that was adopted later on. So that puts a lot of years between us, and fortunately I'm the one that's in the middle. I'm the middle child, and there's 2 on either side. I'm the only one that lived in the house with everybody. So the ones at the far end did not live in the house with those at the upper end. Anyway, that's something you need to know about our family. And something that happened real interesting, my brother Winton had a birthday party when he turned 70. And the idea was that there would be a roast. That was going to be the program. And in the roast, my oldest brother got up and roasted him good. And then they asked the 2 younger guys to come up and roast him. And they both got up and said, we have nothing to say. We don't know that much about him. He's like a father figure to us. I mean, I said, wow. That was a shock to me even, He's like a father figure to them. That's what they knew of him, because there was 14 years between Winton and Hank. That would have made it 21 years between Winton and Peter. There's 12 years between me and Irwin. So I know a little bit about Irwin, but not a whole lot. So, that goes to show what was going on there. And as a matter of fact, now we're all boys. Now my mother tells me that she did have some miscarriages, and she figures those were the girls. So that's the way life was. Anyway, we lived at 4953 then since my mother and father were in businesses, and at the time that I came along, they were renting apartments, kitchenette apartments. Before that, they had owned a store, and they're there in the neighborhood. I guess they sold odd and end candies, and it's kind of like a convenience store in those days. It was like a convenience store. Probably didn't have as many items in it as a convenience store has today, but things that were needed in the neighborhood, that's what they were selling. Now, a funny story about that. One day, somebody came in the store and said, there's a little boy in the front of the store eating salami. And my mother said, what? So she went to the front of the store, and in the window, Winton had climbed up in the window, and they had these salamis hanging down. He had gotten the salami down, and he had the end of it, eating it. So anybody walking by could see. And so anyway, she said she took him, and he was full. She took him and threw him in bed. And when couple hours later, she heard him singing, oh, bang, 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 bang. Oh, bang, 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 bang. So she said later on, she figured out what that was about. She said because somebody had sung at church earlier that week. Oh, what he's done for me. Oh, what he's done for me. Anyway, that's my mother's story about that incident. We lived there in that neighborhood, and I was born in 43. About 1945, my mother decided, the story she tells me, is she decided she wanted a house because what they were living in was a 3-flat building. They were renting out the top floor. I guess they were living in the bottom floor, but they're renting out the 2 top floors. And she wanted a house of her own. So they started looking, and they found a house in Woodland Park. Now, Woodland Park was like a subdivision. It had an entrance and like a gate, and there was a caretaker's house and an oval. And it went down and then circled around and came back the other way, one way. It had 2 lanes. And on one side, there were like mansions, 3-story mansions. There was a 6-flat building, which means there was 3 flats on each side going up in an entrance. And then there were some apartments down at the end of this, when you come in on the right side, there were a few apartments. And then there was an open lot, and then the 6-flat, and then there were 4 or 5 of these mansions. And as it got around the end, at the end of the subdivision, then there were these apartment buildings. It was all apartments on the other side. So you had single quarters on one side, and you had apartment buildings on the other. And in the middle of this oval was green. And there was a playground, and there were bushes. You know, it was nicely manicured, bushes around. And there were kids playing, of course, in the playground. Now, I used to play in the playground. My folks would let me out to play in the playground and stuff like that. And here's a funny story about me, is that we moved in there. It was 1945, but I would imagine I would have been about 2 years old then. But when I was around 3, they used to let me out, and I could go over there and play, and my mother would watch me. And she said every time I'd get out, I'd go into the bushes, and when I come out, she said I'd be walking like my pants were loaded. So she said, now I was pretty much potty trained by this time, but whenever I went in the park, I would have to do it in my pants. They had moving pictures of me going across and disappearing into the bushes and then coming back walking wide-legged. But we used to see those movies, but they were lost. But I have a story about why that happened, why I was doing that. Now, when they wanted to move into this place, they got their money together. They saw, they liked it. They went and did everything they were supposed to do. And then just before they were to move in, they were told that they couldn't move in. There was a problem. And the problem was that this land had previously been owned by Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas is the man who ran for the presidency against Abraham Lincoln. This was land that he had owned. And in his will, he had said that this property could never be owned by anyone of African descent. They had to get that restriction off of the property before they could sell it to them. They said, it's just something we need to take care of legally, and then you can move in. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So anyway, they took care of it, and a few weeks or a month or two later, whenever it was, we moved in. So my thing is, anything I hate is racism. So my story is about me loading my pants up I went across the street and I said, Dookie on you, Stephen Douglas, for not wanting my parents to move in and take that. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But it's interesting that when I grew up there, we used to look out the back windows and we would see tour buses drive up, and people would get out and they'd go inside this park that was next to us. It had this park had a fence around it, a wrought iron fence with, sharp spires on it, went way up. Very impressive park. And then right in the center, there was this spire that went way up in the air, and there was a man on top of it. Well, that represented Stephen Douglas's tomb. He was buried there. And so these were tour buses that were coming around there to visit to visit his tomb in those nice grounds. Evidently, he had a lot of money and was able to set that up for himself, or somebody set it up for him, so that it was a tourist attraction, and it's still there. Matter of fact, a few years ago, I think it was 2009, we were in Chicago from all over the country for my adopted brother's funeral, and a number of us went down there to see that and to look at Woodland Park. Woodland Park has changed since the days when we had a house there. Everything in Woodland Park was torn down and rebuilt, and became a bunch of townhouses, and that's what's there at this point. But Woodland Park was on one side, and then another part there was another park. It was another subdivision called Groveland Park, and Groveland Park was primarily townhouses and small homes. We never really went in there because that stayed primarily white for a long time, and they had very strict restrictions on going in there. But anyway, it was a very interesting neighborhood. I remember that when we were there, there was a Greyhound bus center on the corner of 35th and Cottage, and the buses would come from the bus station and come in there because it was a garage, and they would pull in there and I guess get fixed, and then you'd see them pull out and go, I guess, to go to the bus station to pick up passengers again, hit another route. There was also a Walgreens on the corner, and we used to go to the Walgreens. It was a quick place to go and get things that you needed. There was a brand of hot dogs in Chicago called Lazar's. They were very red, and they were all beef, and they were delicious. It's the best hot dog you will ever put in your mouth. I've never tasted a hot dog as good as a Lazar's hot dog. And they sold them at the ballparks. They sold them at hot dog restaurants, at people who had street stands sold them. Chicago at that time was dominated by two, Vienna and Lazar's. Lazar's has disappeared. Vienna is still in Chicago. It's still a Chicago tradition. And but Lazar's, I know Hank and I have been trying to trace them down for a while. Hank says they were bought out by somebody from Israel and taken to Israel. But they do have one franchise, I believe he said, at the convention center in Chicago. But it was a very delicious hot dog. And I know that once we moved to Michigan, whenever we came in from Michigan, I always had to have a pack. Get a pack of Lazar's hot dogs to eat. Oh, yeah, let me tell you about the house we moved into. It was a 3-story mansion. It was made out of, I'm not sure I guess it's brownstone. Big, rough-looking cuts of stone that were in this thing. It had a black slate roof. It had a cherry wood staircase. When you walked in the front door, it had a double wood doors, so that if you wanted to move something in, you could open it wide. There was paneling on the stairs, and it was two steps was the first landing, and it was a broad landing. Then you'd go up 4 or 5 steps to the second landing, and then it was a number of steps up to the second floor. And when I say a number, it was enough to go a whole story. So the living room was where we spent a lot of time. I'll never forget the living room from the standpoint that Irwin used to decorate a Christmas tree in the living room every year. And that I remember one year the tree was so large it bent. And but he found a way to get the angel on top, and he loaded that thing up with angel hair. And if you get close to it, the angel hair would burn you up. And I was a little kid. I was always getting too close to it. And I can remember my mother saying, "Don't get close to that tree." Yeah. Another thing about that living room is we didn't have television in those days, but everybody had radios, and we had a tall radio, and it had a record changer on top. So Irwin, I know he had a lot of records. He would play his records on that record changer. And then in the evenings, he and Winton would be down in front of the radio, leaning against the radio, listening to their shows. And of course, nothing was more fun than a radio show, because they had all these sounds and stuff. Your imagination would take over, and you were there. You really didn't need TV. And they'd have creaky doors opening and shutting, and all kind of sound effects going on. So it was quite exciting. And they would be in there, and they loved to listen to scary shows and turn the lights out in the scary shows. Well, I didn't want to go in there when the lights were out, when they had on those scary shows. But, and then Irwin, he would do stuff. He was always the mischievous one. He would do stuff to scare me. Boo! And I'd be out of there, But I remember them. They were always in on those scary shows. Now, Irwin tells the story that I would tell him, "No murder, no murder." And they would say, "Yeah, no murder." And then there would be a murder show, so, and I would go out of there. I'd had it. Okay, so we moved in there in 45, and then in 47, that's when the conferences decided that, the black churches decided they wanted their own conferences. So in 47 was about the time that they were looking for conference offices. So that 6-flat apartment building on our side of the street was available. So my father told the conference brethren, if you're looking for a building and you can't find one, you might look at this 6-flat. You can make the bottom 2 flats offices, and the top 4 flats, some of the office staff could work there. So that's what they did. They bought that 6-flat and turned the bottom 2 floors into offices, and they got the zoning for it and everything. And then the preachers lived upstairs, the president, the treasurer, I think the Book and Bible House man, and somebody else. And they had a caretaker who lived in the basement, who took care of the property, because there was not only the 6-flat, but there was also the yard, the empty lot next door. Plus they had parking garage at the back of that lot. So they had all of that property. So the conference kids used to play in the lot. And of course, I played in the playground across the street, but I would go down, because I had friends down there. I would go down to the fence and talk to my friends through the fence. And I had these 2 friends, Donald and Ronald Crow. Their father was the treasurer. And they were, Donald was my age, and Ronnie was a year younger, something like that, year or 2 younger. And every once in a while, they would want to come outside and play. Well, sometimes their folks would let them out, and they could come and they could play for a half hour or so, then they had to go back in. And so every once in a while, they would decided they were coming up over the fence. They could climb. There was a big chain link fence, tall thing. They would come up over that chain link fence and go into the park. And it didn't take long, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. Somebody would alert their dad. He'd come out with a switch and beat him back into the building. I always thought he was very mean. but they had to live by house rules, and those were the house rules. Um, the gentleman in the conference, of course, I knew him pretty well because he was my friend's dad. And but you see the preachers going in and out. They were always well dressed. That was always impressive. And the women in the conference, they were always well groomed ladies. So it was quite an impressive place, for me as a little kid watching these people going in and out of the conference office. It wasn't too long before Donald and Ronald got all excited because there was another family coming that had kids. And because when it first happened there, it was only them. It's just the two of them and me. But there was another family coming that had kids, and so they knew the family. And when they came, it was the Kibble family, and so they had a couple kids that were close to my age. Anne was a couple of years. I think she was a year younger, and her brother was a couple of years younger than her. And so now we had a little group, and then later on, the Roach kids came. Elder Roach was the youth man for the conference, and he had a daughter and a son. So we had a pretty good little group there. But by that time, I was about 10 or 12. And of course, I was living in Michigan by that time, and we'll cover all of that. But I used to be coming on the weekends and in the summers, and so we all got to be a fairly tight unit of kids. I used to go to school. School was right around the corner, just outside the gate and down the block and over. It was called Doolittle School. And I think Doolittle was some kind of a war hero or something. But it was R.L. Doolittle School or something like that. So I went to school there starting, when I was 5 for kindergarten. And I had a friend in the school. His name was Eugene. And I thought they were saying blue jean because that's what we wore in those days was blue jeans. They weren't Levi's. They were blue jeans. They were jeans that were blue and they were baggy. They weren't trimmed. And so I thought everybody was saying blue jean, but they were saying Eugene. They say, I can think back now. They say, his name is Eugene. Blue jean. I insisted it was blue jean. So anyway, and in Chicago, they started you could start school in January if you were old enough. If you turned 5 in the fall, then you could go to school in January. So he had turned 5 in the fall, so he had gone the January before I started school in the fall because my birthday was in August. So when it got to be January and it was time for the semester to change, he was going on to another class because it was like if you started in January it was A, and if you started in the fall it was B. So he was in 1A and he went on, he had to move on. And when he moved on, I was distraught. My best friend, I was 5 years old, my best friend had left me. Oh my goodness, I go to school and it was so terrible. Oh my goodness, I couldn't make it, And I was having all kinds of psychological problems. And so I was being let out. There are people in the room that are laughing at me. So anyway, I was having all these problems because my friend Blue Jean had moved on. Matter of fact, I caused so much problem that the people said to my mother, they said, we understand you're moving to Michigan in, for the next school year for first grade. She said, yes. Why don't you just take him out of school and start him up in Michigan? He'll do okay. So that's what they did. I got a reprieve, fortunately, out of that terrible school that had done me so wrong by getting rid of my best friend, So anyway, that was that little incident with Doolittle School. Now, I had another problem with Doolittle School. I had an older brother who used to tease me about, yeah, you go to school and you do little at Doolittle School. Oh, I don't want to be at that school where you do little. That was Irwin. Yeah, so Irwin was always a big tease. I got more stories about Irwin teasing. So anyway, fortunately, I got a reprieve from Doolittle School. I didn't have to worry about school until we moved up to Michigan and started school in the fall. Now, another thing about Chicago is church. Very unique, Shiloh Church. It was on the corner of 46th and St. Lawrence. And it was a square building, right on the corner. There was no grass. It was just concrete up to the building on two sides. And then this tall building probably looked like 3 stories. And we used to go there, of course, on Sabbath. And when we come out of there after church, we would be standing on the corner for hours, it seemed like. We couldn't get to the car because everybody had to talk. And for a 5-year-old, or for someone who's less than 5, that was murder. But I can remember this one lady. I mean, everybody used to come up and speak, speak to my mother and talk. And I'd be, how kids do, laying against their mother's legs, and, they couldn't be still. And I'd be doing all that kind of stuff. And people would come up and talk to me. And I remember this one lady that used to come out. She was very tall, light-skinned lady, but she was really kind. And I thought she was really nice. And she used to speak to me all the time, but I can remember being shy and shying away and all this kind of stuff. When I was working at Florida Hospital, this lady came up to me. We were at church. I think she was at church. I think this happened at church. She came up to me and said, "You're Nathan Forde?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I used to go to Shiloh Church. Do you remember me talking to you?" I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Well, I used to talk to you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so, we had a conversation. And I was thinking about, who could that lady have been? Finally, one day it dawned on me. That's the lady that used to talk to me, that tall, light-skinned lady that used to talk to me all the time. And she was really kind and really nice. And she married Elder Carter. Her name was Rose Marie Vaughn. And it was kind of interesting. One person I remember out of that. But I also remember Mrs. Thigpen. She used to always come and talk, and with her daughter, Rose Thigpen. And I remembered her. And then there were a cast of other characters that, were just kind of common, ordinary people. But I remember those 2 people specifically. We used to sit in the balcony at that church for a church service, my mother and father. And I think Winton used to sit with us. Irwin used to sit kind of off to the right and down a couple rows with his girlfriend. And they would talk, and it would irritate my father, and he would try and get his attention. And sometimes he'd get up and go over there and tell them to be quiet. That would last for a little bit, and then they'd go back to talking. But up there in the balcony, we had, a vantage point. You could see everything down below. And they had a wide rostrum. And the minister, his name was Elder Clark. He was a short West Indian man, and he always wore tails. He wore a coat that had tails, down below the knee. And he would run back and forth across that stage preaching, and those tails would be flapping in the wind. And I remember that quite vividly. Okay, in 1947, I think it was 47, maybe it was 46. Anyway, I remember that we took a trip to California on a bus with, I believe it was a choir, youth choir. We were going to the Youth Congress in San Francisco. And we took a bus, and we went out to California and had this great time out there. One thing I remember from that trip was that when we got off a bus, my mother and Winton and I were riding a city bus. We got to the stop. Winton got off, my mother got off, and I was coming off behind my mother, and we were coming off the back door, which is an automatic door, and the door closed, and my foot was inside, and the bus was pulling off, and I was stuck going down the street, and my mother yells to Winton, "Catch that bus." So Winton put it into high gear and caught the bus, and they released my foot, and I was able to get out of that mess. I wasn't injured or anything. I was coming off, and I guess I was held high enough. That thing closed, and I guess I was just dangling like that. So anyway, I guess you could call it a close call with death or whatever. But fortunately, Winton was there. Winton hadn't been there. I don't know what would have happened. The bus would have been down the street. But he was old enough and fast enough to catch the bus. Anyway, on the way back to Chicago, we were on a road that was, this is in the 1940s. We didn't, as this is before there were super highways. You just had your U.S. highways and, soft shoulders and all of that type of thing. So we had to stop at this, we stopped at this bus stop. My mother asked me, do you need to go to the bathroom? I said, no, I don't need to go to the bathroom. Are you sure? No, I don't move. She shopped for candy and all. Are you sure you want to go to the bathroom? I don't need to go to the bathroom. So, anyway, we got back on the bus and it was raining. It's been raining all day. And we were going down the road and I said, Mama, I got to go to the bathroom. She said, oh, my Lord. Why didn't you say you had to go to the bathroom? I didn't have to go then. I have to go down. Okay, you're going up there and tell the driver. And there were all kind of suitcases in the middle of the aisle. So I had to walk over all these suitcases and get up, tell the bus driver, I need to go to the bathroom. So he pulled off on the shoulder. And I got out and I went to the bathroom. One little kid going to the bathroom outside the bus. And anyway, I got through. I got back on the bus and climbed back into my seat. And the bus driver tried to pull out. Stuck. I had gotten the bus stuck. So they had to get a tow truck to pull us out of that. And boy, my mother was upset with me. So every time from then on, whenever we stop, you're going to the bathroom, whether you want to go to the bathroom or not. So anyway, that's the way we came home.